In this episode of Deconstructing Comics, scientist and comics fan Ryan Haupt and I discuss the first 4 volumes of Brian K. Vaughan and Cliff Chiang's time travel series, Paper Girls. First, I'd like to thank our patrons for keeping this show going. Join them at patreon.com/deconcomics, or send a one-time donation of any amount via PayPal to donate@deconstructingcomics.com. We appreciate your support. This is Tim.
This is Ryan.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo, and joining me from, I believe, Washington, D.C.
Correct.
Is Ryan Haupt. How you doing?
I'm all right. How are you?
Okay. This episode's been a long time coming. 16 months ago, I was going to talk about the first 2 volumes with someone else, and that fell through, and it's been on the back burner for a long time. And we're talking about Paper Girls. Now it's up to 4 volumes out, 20 issues. I don't know, has 21 come out? Do you know?
No, they're on a brief hiatus. But really, when it comes to time travel, does it ever take too long to really get it done?
So issue 42 will come out, and then number 25, and
that'd be a weird. Whoa! What if somebody did that?
Somebody did that. Yeah, I forgot who it was. Some comic came out of Chew. Remember Chew? Like some far future issue came out. To kind of, give us a preview or like show us something that happened in the future and then go back and show us what happened in between.
I do kind of remember that.
Yeah. Wow, I forgot about that.
Cool, good pull.
Anyway, so Paper Girls, written by Brian K. Vaughan, art by Cliff Chiang, colors by Matt Wilson, letters by Jared K. Fletcher. And it's about 12-year-olds, so on the credits page, they all have photos of themselves at 12 years old or so, which is kind of cool. So now this is the kind of thing that could be easily spoiled if you haven't read it and want to. So for the first part here, we're going to kind of focus on the first volume or so, the first 5 issues. And then I'll give a spoiler warning, and anything will be fair game. And actually, I was trying to remember now, a couple years ago when I picked this up, what attracted me to it, because I'd been kind of down on Brian K. Vaughan for a while. I had some problems with Why the Last Man. I never finished it. I read Ex Machina. Yeah, I read Ex Machina for a while, and didn't really feel like it was living up to its potential. And I will
agree with you on Ex Machina, but the final few issues of Why the Last Man, I think, are some of the best issues that I've in comics, for me, emotionally, like as a fulfilling end of a story.
I see. I guess part of it was I felt like all of Vaughn's characters sort of talked the same. They all seemed to be kind of like, they all seem to have his brain in their heads or something.
I see that a little bit, yeah. A lot of trivia nerds.
And this one, I don't think that's so much of a problem. But I was trying to remember what it was that attracted me to it. I mean, time travel was always a big draw for me, but I'm not even sure if I knew that when I got interested in it. If it was just like the art style attracted me or what. But I was more interested in reading this than I was in reading Saga. I did finally read the first volume of Saga when I got a chance to read it for free, and I liked it better than I expected to, I guess, but I haven't kept going on that. But, this one I've continued to read. Now, so you said you finished reading Why. What else of Vaughn's have you read?
Pretty much, I would say I am a Brian K. Vaughan fan, so I've read most of his stuff. I remember reading his early Hood stuff for Marvel. The original Runaways was great. Really liked Why the Last Man. Pride of Baghdad, I think, is a seminal work of that era of comics. I don't think you can talk about comics during the Bush era without thinking about Pride of Baghdad and what that book kind of meant, and how just stunningly gorgeous it was with Nico Henricon's art.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure I'm butchering his name. Sorry about that.
I did read that. I'd kind of forgotten about it. But yeah, I think we talked about it on a really early episode of this podcast.
And then I thought Private Eye, when he launched Comic Syndicate with Marcos Martin, was a really interesting book about, the internet and privacy and identity and all that stuff. And then, I've been enjoying Saga. I fell behind on Saga a little bit, but then I got caught up, so I'm back on issues of Saga. And then I had fallen behind on this book, but thanks to your continued and gentle prodding, I got through all the issues and found myself really absorbed in the story. And I think the more I read Paper Girls, the more I respect what he's doing and how carefully crafted this story is. And I'm really excited to see where it goes next.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so, right. So, to talk about the first volume, just as an introduction to people who haven't read it and want to. So it starts out, it's November 1st, 1988, early morning. And Erin, who is 12, a 12-year-old girl, she's just starting an early morning paper route. It's her first day. Now, the name of the newspaper is the Cleveland Preserver, which I thought was kind of an odd name for a newspaper. And in this kind of story, anytime there's something that sounds a little odd, you start to think, that might be significant. It seems to have some kind of meaning. But maybe we can come back to that. I have a feeling I know kind of what it's pointing to, but boy, it's going to be tough to live up to the spoiler warning here.
Well, especially because it's a time travel story, so there's stuff that happens in this book that you don't find out the explanation for until later because it's involved in a loop. So
yeah, that makes it particularly tough here. Anyway,
but the basic premise is it's November 1st. Erin is new to town, and it's her first morning out as a paper girl. And she has heard legend, she's heard tell of these few other girls who have the gumption to be paper girls as well. And she ends up meeting up with them, and then they get up to some hijinks.
Yeah. They kind of band together because there's still some weirdos out running around after Halloween, but then things get really weird and they get kind of swept up into this sort of time traveling conflict that's going on. And about kind of this story's approach to time travel, it's stated at least once, maybe more, that there are no alternate timelines. And another point, somebody says, like, your end is your end. I mean, if that's how you're going to die, you will die that way, and you can't do anything to change that. And I was wondering why Vaughan decided to do that. I mean, did he feel like it was a cheat to be able to go back and change things, or just because it would drive us all crazy if you had that door open? I don't know, what do you think?
I think it's, probably as a writer, there's a challenge in creating a closed loop or a system that's self-consistent. And, if you're allowed to create alternate timelines, then you can kind of just go crazy. And I think there's a lot less structure and rules to the story you're telling. Whereas if you tell yourself and your audience up front, it's a magician's trick, right? There's nothing up my sleeves. So now the reveal or the denouement is going to be that much more impressive because he showed it. He showed that there were no tricks.
Now, I thought it was interesting that he's starting the story and, building the story around characters who were at the age they're at 30 years ago. And, for a time travel story, I think that creates an advantage because he can have them move up to 30 years into the future and know what happened in the intervening years because we've already had those years. Of course, it looks like now they're going further into the future than this, but I think I'm just going to give a spoiler warning here because it's really hard to talk about this without going beyond volume 1. Yeah, so anything is fair game here, but I would say...
I guess one other general thing I'll mention before we get into full spoiler territory is another reason to read this book is Cliff Chiang's art and Matt Wilson's colors.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I did want to mention that before
there's no spoilers. They're a great team, and they make this book gorgeous every single page, and so it's not a spoiler to say that it looks great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was thinking, looking through it a little bit, again, just a minute ago, how Chiang has to be really imaginative on some of this stuff, because it's like, what does a time machine look like when it's launching off into a different time? So, and he's got this, every time that happens, there are these kind of look like swirling piece, metal things. It's kind of hard to explain what it is, but it's really interesting visual, and we see it a number of times.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I read an interview from CBR of Chiang and Vaughan, and Chiang himself talks about what a great job the Matt Wilson did on the colors, particularly in one particular panel that I'm not going to spoil at this point. But the colors are definitely a huge part of it. It really looks good. Okay, I mean, some of the things in my notes, and I had to work a lot on my notes to make them coherent, but some of the things in here are just...
Now we're in the full spoiler territory.
Yes.
Okay, so when she leaves to go on her paper route on the first morning, there's a red arc streaking through the sky, and those are the teenagers landing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which is awesome. Like, that's such a great little detail that, like, even in one of the first panels, you're seeing the time travelers arrive, even though the character in the panel doesn't see that.
Right. Yeah. Nothing more of that shows up for many pages later.
And so basically what we're seeing in this book is these girls get caught up in an intergenerational war between time travelers in the future who are adults and think that time travel is bad and shouldn't be used to go back in time because you might mess something up. Versus, and then they're fighting a war against teenagers from even further in the future who are rebelling against the older generations. Or maybe I have that backwards.
No, I think you're right. You're right. Yeah, those teenagers, the younger ones, are from further in the future, and they think, time travel is fine. We can do this. And they're the people, the adults from a little more recently are saying, nope, can't do time travel. It's just, you should never do that. And so it's become this, like, there's a lot of animosity and mistrust between the two sides, and thinks the other side is evil and terrible and can't be trusted. And then these girls just kind of get caught in the middle of it.
Right. And so, there's a YouTube channel called Minute Physics where the host breaks down complicated physics topics. It's one of those kind of like whiteboard or marker on the whiteboard sort of shows, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And he has one about time travel and fiction. And he doesn't cover Paper Girls specifically, but he does cover a lot of movies that you would like if you are into these kinds of stories. So he does Back to the Future, and he does Primer, and he does Groundhog Day, and he even does like Harry Potter. So I watched that video before reading this series again because I wanted to have a diagrammatic idea of how to think about how these stories work. So I basically tried to draw the same kind of diagrams he draws to tell the time travel stories for Paper Girls. Now mine didn't end up as clean as his, and obviously they're incomplete because the story is still being told. But one of the things I realized is that it's actually pretty self-contained, the time travel. The characters, the Paper Girls, are pretty much always moving forward. Even when they go back in time, they're kind of just always moving in a straight line. There's not a lot of loops. And the war that we're seeing fought is actually moving backwards. And so the stuff we see in Volume 1 is like the end game of the war that's being fought in earlier and earlier stages as the Paper Girls move forward and forward and forward.
Right, yeah, the kind of leader of the anti-time travel group, who they call the Grandfather, in
Which
volume...
did you figure out his?
Yes.
Did you figure out his real name?
Yes.
Okay. That's awesome.
But yeah,
I'll save that. People should figure
we'll
that
save
one out.
that. But yeah, in volume 3, we see a much... 3 or 4 was it? I guess it was 4. We see a much younger version of him.
But he also, at one point, he asks if the Quetzalcoatl clones are ready for battle, and Quetzalcoatl is the giant pterodactyloid thing that we see in Volume 1. And so, like, they're preparing for events that we see in the past, but they're preparing for them, and they haven't yet happened in the future. Which is kind of cool.
Right. Right.
It's so funny. So
even though Volume 4 takes place in the year 2000... which is, after the time when the story starts, for the time travelers, it's earlier.
So Volume 1 takes place all in, is it 1988?
In 88, yes.
Volume 2 takes place in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
Volume 3 takes place in 11,706 BCE. So this is the Y diagram helps.
Yeah.
And then... and then Volume 4 takes place in year 2000 at Y2K, basically.
Right. Yeah. So the Y2K thing, I thought it was. So I mean, obviously, this is a different reality from our own. I'm wondering why, in their world, the Millennium Bug had so much worse of an effect than it did actually.
Right.
If that has something to do with the time travel, did that somehow cause the bug to be worse? We don't know yet.
Yeah, that's one of the enduring mysteries so far.
Yeah, and later on I have a list of other sort of questions that haven't been answered yet about the series.
So in each arc of the book so far has kind of focused on one of the girls.
Mm-hmm.
Which has been cool, because when you if you just read the first volume, I think you might think that this is a story about Aaron.
Yeah.
And as I kept reading, I was like, oh no, this is an ensemble piece. Like, each of these girls is going to get kind of their own arc with its own little bit of time travel. And then I'm hoping, that all kind of comes together in the end and stitches together into a nice cohesive thing.
Mm-hmm.
Which I imagine it will.
Yeah.
And then the girls do at various points interact with future versions of themselves. And this is where I think a lot of the questions about the alternate timelines comes in, because none of their future selves ever remember having gone on a time travel adventure with the other Paper Girls.
Mm-hmm.
And so that suggests that there's some sort of wonkery happening where I think the most obvious or plausible theory is that they somehow get their memories erased, which we know is a technology that exists with the time travelers, because they will erase people's memories. So they must get sent back to 1988 still as 12-year-olds, so that they can all continue living their lives forward, but in some way where they don't remember these events and drift apart as friends.
Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of sad. Like, it's kind of, we know no matter how this ties up, we're probably going to get a kind of melancholic ending.
Yeah. Well, I also thought, I mean, yeah, that's certainly true, but also, having them meet their future selves, and if the future selves remembered everything, they could spoil all the rest of the story for the other characters and us. So, from a writing perspective, it works a lot better to have the future selves not know anything.
Yeah.
We'd like them to remember everything, but it wouldn't be as good of a story probably in that case.
Right. And it's cool because, there's also these teenagers from the future, and we don't spend a ton of time with them in Volume 1 before they meet some untimely ends, time travel, haha. But it's cool that we get to also learn more about them and about the grandfather and his team as we move forward. So, like, we eventually learn all this little bits of backstory about the teenagers, Heck and Naldo, and I can't remember the third one's name.
Yeah.
And it's all just, man, it is well crafted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so intricate. It's kind of hard to explain. Like, well, there's this clone of Aaron in Volume 2, and she refers to Heck as Uncle Heck. Although I don't know.
That.
Well, and we can.
She was also a liar, so what, you know.
Well, maybe. I mean, we're never quite sure who can be trusted in this. And the two sides of the time travel argument will always say that the other side can't be trusted and they're going to kill you and whatever. And so, yeah, I mean, clone Aaron says if you don't come with me into the far future, you're basically as good as dead because these other people will kill you. But of course they don't. And does that mean that clone Aaron is a liar, or does it just mean that her idea of the other side is, much worse than they actually are because of, there's this kind of polarization, which sort of reminds me of the current political situation in America, but this story was started before our current president became president, so I'm not sure. Of course, there was polarization before that, but I don't know if that's what Vaughan had in mind or not.
Well, I think, to me, the major theme of the book is about growing up and maturing and what the future holds for you as you become an adult and how generations treat each other as we all suffer through the same exact awkwardness generation after generation, yet somehow we pretend that it's a new problem every time. And that, these generational shifts are always painful and they're always ugly and they always lead to frustration and sometimes, in this case, all-out violence and war.
Did you notice the theme of apples? There are a lot of apples showing up, and from that dream that Aaron has at the very beginning of the story, I mean, it's pretty clear that the apples are suggesting Adam and Eve, the tree of knowledge. In her dream, that ghost of Krista McAuliffe, the astronaut who died in the Challenger explosion, saying, "We warned you, never eat from the tree of knowledge." Which, as she says that, we can see the Challenger explosion reflected in her helmet, which kind of suggested to me it's kind of referring to the way she herself died, sort of going into or trying to go into space anyway, was trying to eat from the tree of knowledge, sort of.
Right. And all of the time travel machines in this world are also spaceships. Mm-hmm. So in order to avoid accidentally phasing into a matter when you time travel, they basically calculate it so that they are always entering the time stream in Earth's orbit and then kind of falling to Earth from higher up. So that way they're, not phasing into a wall or something.
Right.
So that's kind of a cool idea.
Oh, about the newspaper name, the Cleveland Preserver. I wondered if Preserver had something to do with, I don't know, with the anti-time travel group, because they want to preserve things as they would be without time travel. I don't know.
Maybe. I mean, the newspaper, we also find out that the teenage time travelers, the one who don't mind mucking with the time stream, have been going all throughout time and planting, essentially creating plants, informing people in that era, hey, we're time travelers, and here's how you can help us. And they meet a cartoonist who does one of the comic strips for the Cleveland Preserver, who is using that comic strip to feed information into the future secretly. Mm-hmm. And she's been doing that since she took over the strip in the 70s. And that's the storyline that takes place in the year 2000. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah. Coming up, anachronistic language, animals, were there really giant ground sloths in prehistoric Ohio? Unanswered questions, and more. First, just a reminder that you can help this podcast by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon and make that your bookmark for future purchases. We'll then get a percentage of what you spend. It costs you nothing extra and helps us cover web hosting and the other costs of presenting this show every week. We really appreciate your support.
Are you willing to follow me on a journey and risk getting lost in a swirling maze of past ages, protected only by our red indestructible capes as we break through the final unexplored realm of the time barrier to explore the fantastic Silver Age adventures of the world's greatest hero, Superman? If so, join me each week on the Superman Fan Podcast, as together we'll follow the Man of Steel, his cousin Supergirl, and his closest friends, Perry White, Lois Lane, Jimmy Olsen, Lana Lang, Batman and Robin, and others in Superman's never-ending quest to defend truth and justice in the pages of Action Comics, Superman, World's Finest Comics, Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, and Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane. Go to the supermanfanpodcast.blogspot.com, available on iTunes and most other podcast aggregators. You can also follow the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Medium, Flipboard, and Stitcher. And after you listen, feel free to send email to supermanfanpodcast@gmail.com. And unless you request otherwise, I look forward to reading your comments on future episodes. And don't forget to wear your red indestructible cape, standard safety equipment for traveling through the time barrier.
Now, one problem with writing things that are supposed to take place in an earlier time or with characters from an earlier time is getting the details of the language right. Quite a while ago, there was an episode of the Lexicon Valley podcast where they looked at Mad Men and Downton Abbey and were pointing out how some expressions that got used in those shows, those expressions didn't actually exist yet at that time. And I noticed that a little bit in this also. A couple of things in particular. Well, there's a lot of use of effing, to avoid saying the actual word, which I don't think, as far as I know, nobody was saying that in 1988. I never heard it until 2002 myself, but of course I left America in 1989, so I might have missed it, but I had never heard that before then. Also, there's an exchange in Volume 1 between the girl Mackenzie and her stepmom of she met my dad in AA. Oh, which part of Anonymous don't you understand? I don't know. Which part of not drinking don't you understand? And that which part of something don't you understand, used in a sarcastic way, I don't think anybody was using in the 80s.
That stuff didn't stand out to me. But I mean, these,
it's a minor thing, but it's just kind of interesting. It's really hard to write an earlier time and keep the language, of that time.
Sure, and I mean, for 12-year-olds from the late 80s, they're pretty precocious. They speak very well for themselves, almost as if adults were writing their dialogue.
Yeah. That was something in my notes too. Do they really seem like 12-year-olds?
No, they don't to me, but it's fine. They still seem like young people.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're young. They're just generally being younger than most of the other people involved in the story comes across.
Yeah, they felt more like 16-year-olds to me, but.
And then there's there's a lot of future speak. So in the grandfather's era, people speak in almost a Grant Morrison-ese of leet speak and emojis and numeric substitutions.
Vaughan must have had a lot of fun putting that language together. I know there's consistency, and he's not just throwing random stuff on there. He's worked out something.
You mean with the way the teenagers talk with the kanji?
No, I mean the kind of knight type people who are on the conservative side and writing the flying dinosaurs.
Yeah.
They have this kind sort of, I guess it's supposed to be a future version of English, but it seems to have some Shakespearean things mixed in with it. But yeah, I mean, he must have had a lot of fun with that. Yeah, now the teenagers' language and the clone Aaron language in a whole different set of characters. I mean, did the letterer Jared Fletcher come up with those, I wonder? It's kind of above and beyond the line of duty for a letterer to come up with a whole new set of characters.
I don't know if it was Jared K. Fletcher that came up with those, but it's I did a little digging online, and it's just a 1-to-1 cipher. So each of their weird letters just corresponds to one-ish of normal English letters.
Ah, interesting.
So
There's a way to read it.
Yeah, people have gone back and translated it. And honestly, none of the translations, Brian K. Vaughan and Cliff Chiang working together, the context of what they're talking about is clear enough that you don't. The translation is exactly what you think they're saying. It's like, we gotta go. Okay, hurry, look out. It's like, it's a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it is a little frustrating to look at, dialogue balloons and not have the foggiest idea what it says. But yeah, when you look at the pictures, you can get a close enough idea.
I find that, there are comic writers that do that. Like, I know Greg Rucka, I feel like there was a time when he would just have characters speaking in French and never translate it. And that he would just do it. And it's like, I don't speak French. I probably am not going to go type this into a translator just to figure out what's going on. I'm just going to accept that I can probably figure out what's going on from context and hope that I'm close enough. And that's something comics can do that I guess you can't always do that because if you try to do that in a novel, it really would just be completely incomprehensible, I think. I almost think you need the context of the art and the facial expression that lives on the page in a way that doesn't live on the page for a novel. To really pull that off. Right,
yeah, you need visuals. It would probably work in a movie, but in a prose novel, no. Something I noticed about the art, maybe it's just kind of the general trend in comics, but there are pretty much no motion lines. So like when Mackenzie flicks away a cigarette, it's just, in midair, and there are no lines that are, showing us that it's moving. Which becomes a little bit of an issue in Volume 4 because when that police car explodes and then everything just freezes in midair.
That was kind of that did kind of miss a beat there a little bit. You're right.
Drones come in and kind of reverse everything. But, because, that piece of debris flying by Tiffany's face, it just kind of sits there in the air. And if there had been motion, it's always difficult to show lack of motion in comics. So, if there had been motion lines in one panel and then no motion lines in the next panel and it was still in the same place in relation to her face, that might have been a little easier to understand. I was a little puzzled there at first.
Yep, that was one moment where there was a bit of a misstep in the art, but, it took me a second to figure out what was going on, and then I did figure out what was going on. I didn't think about the idea of, it wouldn't be impossible for somebody to go in and add some motion lines and see if the panels work better with some motion lines. And maybe Cliff did that and just didn't like the look. So, yeah, it's good. But it did, that exact story moment did kind of catch me too, as sort of like a, and then, oh.
Yeah, same here. Did you notice, this is kind of a minor detail, but in Volume 1, so Aaron gets shot.
Yes.
And while she's sort of delirious, she has a dream where she's talking to Ronald Reagan.
Yes.
And part of that conversation with Reagan is shown in a pumpkin patch. And she's talking about how few friends she has, and she tries to include her pen pal as one of her friends, and Reagan says, "That's just sad, Aaron." And Aaron has this really Charlie Brown expression on her face with the kind of zigzag mouth.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty clear that the art was invoking Peanuts there. And I guess it was because her like, "I don't have any friends" sounded kind of like Charlie Brown. I wasn't quite sure what that was doing there, but it was a little amusing anyway.
It's also the day after Halloween.
Yeah, true.
So she'd probably been to a pumpkin patch recently. And there's also some apple symbolism in that one, but the apple has been shot, so there's now a direct comparison of Aaron and the apple, and that's also when Reagan tells her to remember her papers, and all the other paper girls think she's nuts, but then you eventually learn that they need the papers because of the comic strips containing clues to the future.
Right. Well, it was interesting. I mean, I didn't even notice it the first time I prepared to do this as an episode. But yeah, I mean, Erin insists on carrying her bag of newspapers all through everywhere they go. And I wondered if, I mean, of course, having those there is useful in terms of that comic strip, but I also wondered if maybe, the newspapers and, the need to make sure they get delivered is sort of a symbol of, adult responsibility.
I think so. And she's taken it on as her identity, right? I am a paper girl. Mm-hmm. I deliver papers. So I think it's also just her perception that this is my identity and these are my new friends and this is the thing we share in common with these people I don't really know that well, so I better do it right.
Yeah, and then we see, 2016 Erin still works for the paper, although not as a delivery person, but that is her identity going forward.
Oh, yeah, that's a good. I didn't even think of that when I said that was her identity, but you're absolutely right.
Oh boy, what else? Let's see. Seeing the girls in 2016 going crazy over that flat screen TV was pretty amusing.
Mm-hmm. And then you notice when they're in year 2000, there are guys stealing a flat screen TV, and it's got a price tag on it that's like $10,000 or something. It's
and a little thing on the box that says only 5 inches thick.
Right, exactly. So there's a lot of stuff like that in the series where they reference something and then there's a callback. The cool thing I picked up on, and I'm sure you did too, is that obviously the entire book takes place in this suburb of Cleveland called Stony Creek. Stony.
It was in my notes here somewhere. Stony Stream.
Stony Stream, which is a fictional suburb of Cleveland, but we also know that all these time machines are capable of space flight, so they could go anywhere in the world. But even when they're in the Pleistocene, which is the 11,000 years ago volume, the woman who invents time travel arrives, and we didn't really talk about her, Dr. Quanta, and she gives her latitude and longitude, and it's basically where Cleveland is. So this whole book really does take place in this one little suburb, even when it's 10,000 years ago.
Right. Well, I think that the grandfather said something about that they would be, even if they moved forward in time, they wouldn't change locations. And I think also, the teenage girl that they meet in the prehistory,
Wari.
Yeah, she says something about the name of the place, and it's similar to Stony Stream.
Mm-hmm. So it's always been called that.
Yeah. Well, should we talk about the super spoiler, the origin of the grandfather, or what we know of him?
Sure.
So the prehistory girl, I'm sorry, what was her name again?
Wari. Wari.
Yeah, Wari. So she's carrying around a baby named Japo. And in volume 4, we find out that the grandfather is Japo. Now, how he got there, we don't know. And actually,
other than the fact that so in addition to time machines, there are all these kind of tears or
foldings.
What are they called? Foldings, where time seems to fold back on itself a little bit, and so you have these moments where like there'll be this glowing hole, and if the hole's big enough, you can go through that and end up in another time. Mm-hmm. And they seem very unstable, and they seem to be caused by all these people moving around the time stream in such rapid succession. So they're almost like instabilities caused by ripple effects, which I think is why it's called Stony Stream, because it's like ripples in the water, right? And like you can have in these babbling books, you can have like eddies and things, parts where the stream doubles back on itself. And so I read there's a really good novella called Einstein's Dreams. And it's written by, I believe it was written by Alan Lightman, which is a hilarious name for a guy writing about Einstein. And Alan Lightman, the author, was a physicist, but left physics to pursue art and novels and things like that for his own personal reasons. But this little book, it's short, but it's all about how when Albert Einstein worked for the patent office in Bern, Switzerland, that was the same time he was coming up with his theory of relativity. So if you think your day job keeps you too busy to get anything done on the side, feel less than. But the book is kind of, the framing device is young Albert Einstein, overworked, tired, constantly like napping and falling asleep on the train or going to bed at night, exhausted from working on patents all day. And every time he goes to sleep, he dreams about a different way that time could work. And so like there's one dream he has where time goes more slowly the further you are from a source of gravity. And so like the rich build these ultra high stilted mansions to keep themselves as far from the center of Earth as possible, and the poor live down in the valleys and die sooner but live happier lives. It's like this, all these fascinating little vignettes about the ways time could work. And one of the ways is time flows like a river, but every once in a while it does eddy back on itself. And so what we think of as the crazy homeless person is a person who's been flung back in time and is going to stay there for, for however long until the current catches up and they get swept back to where they're supposed to be, but they huddle and hide to avoid altering anything. And I don't say that to be insensitive to people, the homeless people. I know it's a plight and not a great situation for our society, but like I thought that was a really interesting way of thinking about it, and that whole time flowing like a river thing. And I don't know if Brian K. Vaughan's read that book, but his creek imagery, his stream imagery, and the way that time kind of folds in on itself reminded me of that.
Okay. Oh, now, as I mentioned to you in email, we really need to talk about the tardigrades.
Well, I want to do like an animal corner.
Okay.
Here in a minute, but do we need to talk more? So we don't know how.
Oh yeah. So Japo.
Well, I guess, do we want to do animal corner, or do we want to do open questions?
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. Well, we were on the verge of this question, but yeah, just exactly how does Japo get from the far past to the future? I mean, presumably he somehow falls through a folding or steps through.
I don't think so.
Or no?
No, I think Dr. Quanta. They leave her in the Pleistocene. Remember? They leave the woman who invented time travel with Wari and her kid. So I think when Dr. Quanta goes back to her normal time, she brings Wari and Japo with her. So Japo, I think, gets raised in the future.
Oh, Wari too, you think?
Yes, because so we're super spoiler territory. I think it might be issue 20, the most recent issue that's come out. There is a scene in Japo's study where he's looking at photos on his desk, and there's a photo of him and a woman or him as a kid and a woman who looks like older Wari, and then a mysterious woman in a hat. And I think the mysterious woman in a hat is probably Dr. Quanta, and the frame for the photo is an apple.
Yeah, so again, I remember noticing the apple frame, but I missed what was in the frame, I guess. I
think apple. Japo and Wari, and then a mysterious woman who's got her face and hair covered with a hat, so we can't see who she is. And the most obvious answer is that's Dr. Quanta, and that's how they got to the future. That's how Japo and Wari got to the future.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now. Yeah, it's the beginning of issue 20.
That's the most recent issue we have. So.
Okay.
And at the end of that issue, so that's this has all been 5-issue arcs, and so there's usually a big time jump at the end of each of these arcs, so that you get kind of a oh gee whiz moment to launch into the next arc. And the oh gee whiz moment is they have gone into the far, far future, and so the next arc is going to be the far, far future, and the girl who hasn't. We don't know how many issues this series is going to run. Brian K. Vaughan won't say. But Mac is the only one of the girls right now who hasn't really had an arc dedicated to her.
Yeah,
so I'm guessing it's going to be a Mac-focused arc. Because we just had... So the most recent arc was Tiffany. The arc before that was KG. And the arc before that was Cage. So she's the one who's got an arc left to have. So my suspicion is we're going to have a Mac arc which is going to deal with the fact when we mentioned earlier, your end is your end. Mac learns supposedly how she's going to die early in the series, and then it definitely has affected her and her behavior. She was always kind of the headstrong, tough guy one, but she's even more reckless, thinking that she essentially knows exactly when she's going to die, so nothing can kill her before that.
Mm-hmm.
Which was an interesting, clearly a coping mechanism for some trauma, I think, but an interesting take on. I don't know that if I learned how I would die, my first reaction will be, now I can do whatever I want until that happens. But that's kind of a cool play on it, and maybe a play that a 12, maybe that is the way a 12-year-old would think about it, especially one with kind of the rough life that Max had already. So I think the next arc is going to be Far Future and Mac, and there's also been a flash forward of Mac, who's pretty homophobic, and KJ, who is realizing she's probably a lesbian, and there's a vision of the future where they are kissing.
Mm-hmm.
And so if there are no alternate timelines, then that must, and we haven't seen that happen yet, then it must happen. And it did look like it was taking place in like a future cityscape.
Right.
So I think the next arc is going to be Mac dealing with those feelings and whatever it is, whatever part of her story needs to be told before we have a final arc that ties everything together and sets the stage to begin Volume 1, presumably.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I would not be surprised if it's maybe 10 more issues. It feels like we're getting kind of close to the end. Yeah, I'm wondering if that far future is the time of Clone Aaron. You know, we saw a little bit through that folding at the end of the second volume, and it looked like maybe a similar world to...
The designs don't look the same to me, and future Aaron said she came from 68,000 years in the future, whereas Dr. Quanta invents and then first time travels back to the Pleistocene from the year 2055, and that Dr. Quanta was born November 25th, 2016. So I suspect, I don't think they're as far in the future as Clone Aaron. I think that they're probably right around when Dr. Quanta is going to invent time travel.
Okay.
That's just me, though. I could be totally wrong, but...
Yeah, I thought it was interesting she was born in 2016 when they have visited 2016. I don't know if they would have crossed the path of her mother or anything, but...
Yeah, we might need to go back and scour that volume.
Yeah, I mean, it's the kind of thing where, you know, important things are revealed in kind of a offhand or subtle way, and it really helps to reread it, and you always catch things that you didn't catch the previous times. I mean, those first two volumes I've now read at least 4 times, and they make more sense every time.
Yep, and it's going to be really fun, I think, to see where... I just noticed in 2016 when they fall out of a fold, it's at an Applebee's. The apple, see, like the apple symbolism, man. It just keeps on coming. So, yeah, I think this will definitely, I agree, it has already benefited from rereads, and I think will continue to do so.
Okay, so how about some animals?
Okay. You want to talk about tardigrades?
Right. So when the clone Erin comes to 2016, she accidentally brings along some tardigrades and at least one maggot, but they become much larger than they normally are. And
right.
I had not even been aware of tardigrades, but...
Yeah, and the throwaway line she says is that just like time, size is also relative.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something about the way time travel happens that, at least from that timeline she's from, the technology that they have, it's sometimes if there's any tagger or hangers on,
stowaways, I think she says.
Stowaways, yeah, then they can get enlarged. So yeah, tardigrades are a real animal. They are an animal, and they're pretty fascinating. They're very small, microscopic animals, micro animals, and they're sometimes called water bears, is the name you might have heard for them, and they're incredibly hardy. They seem like they can survive just about anything, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, I saw on Wikipedia they can like survive being in space for an extended period with no oxygen or anything.
Mm-hmm. So they essentially, when they get put in duress, they can. So they're an extremophile, or I guess they're not considered true extremophiles, but they can shut down their metabolism and essentially go into a hardened stasis mode where they like expel most of their water and stop their metabolism down to, not even 1% of normal. And they can essentially just kind of hang out as this dehydrated, non-functioning version of themselves until back in an environment where they are capable of surviving, and then they kind of come back to life. And that includes extreme dehydration. It includes, the vacuum of space. It includes extreme temperatures from very cold to very hot. It includes extreme pressures like the bottom of Mariana's Trench. They're incredible little animals, and people should respect the mighty water bear.
Now, where do they live exactly, or do they just live everywhere? I'm a little fuzzy on their habitat.
Yeah, they've been found everywhere. Yes, anywhere there are animals, they seem to show up. So we're constantly finding new ones, new species within the types. They're not just one species of tardigrade. There's multiple types. So they seem to have a circumglobal distribution.
But I mean, do they? I know that there are some kinds of microscopic life that live on people, but those are maybe more like bacteria or something rather than animals like tardigrades. Do tardigrades live in water, or they live out in the ground, or would they be inside of a house? Or
yeah. Yes to all. No, I don't think you've got a tardigrade on you right now, but yes, they could easily live in any of those environments. And it's one of those things where, as far as we know, they can live wherever they damn well please. And every time we look for them, they're very small. And when they're in their cryptobiotic stage, it can be hard to detect them because they're not doing anything. But they seem to be one of those animals that, once we think to look for them, we tend to find them wherever we look. So from the poles to the equator, we just, Anywhere you kind of look in the sediment and sort through it and put it under the microscope, your odds, it seems like you have some chance of finding a tardigrade. Which I know is not a super satisfying answer, but at the same time, it's kind of a crazy one. And there are fossil specimens going back to the mid-Cambrian, which is when life first evolved hard parts 500-ish million years ago. So they also, not only are they found all over Earth, they are found all over time, as long as time has had animals, which honestly isn't that long compared to the length that Earth has been around. But as there are a few other animals that are from the fossil record that far back that are still alive today. So
now, were there other animals? Of course, there are the dinosaurs. You gave them a specific name.
Pterodactyls aren't dinosaurs.
Okay.
It's very important to point out. So the flying Quetzalcoatl, which is named after the Aztec god that you would sacrifice people to, Quetzalcoatl that's the largest flying animal that's ever lived, which is kind of cool. So it was the size of a small plane, like a Cessna. It's a flying Mesozoic reptile. So it lived at the same time as the dinosaurs, but is not a dinosaur. It's a pterosaur, which is the large group of all the flying reptiles that you've seen in pop culture over time. And then within pterosaurs, there are two broad groups. There are the rhamphorhynchids, which are the ones that have pointy teeth and really long tails and were generally smaller. And then there are the pterodactyloids, which are the ones that have the really long beaks and the ornamental head crests, and the ones that got huge, like the Quetzalcoatlus. So that was that, which was really cool. But then when they're in the Pleistocene, they see some animals that I actually study, which is a lot of fun for me. So they're at one point attacked by a giant ground sloth, which would have lived in that area. We do know that giant ground sloths were well distributed throughout North and South America and even in the Caribbean. So that's fine, and that's cool. And I love seeing a giant ground sloth. I'm guessing that was a Megalonyx or something like that. So a pretty commonly distributed ground sloth, as those things go. And then there's a Glyptodon at some point. I can't remember which exact issue it was from. And then we also see some terror birds, and it's actually most of the stuff we see seems to be South American in origin, which is kind of interesting. I guess it just lends itself towards making that environment feel even more foreign if you're putting things that aren't really super from Cleveland, but we could have been there. I mean, that's the thing about paleontology too, is that like it's possible that they made it to that location and we just haven't found the fossil yet, right? Which is why I would love to have a time machine so I could go back and look for things.
But as you were talking about the pterodactyls, something occurred to me story-wise here. So the people who are using the pterodactyls as transportation are the ones who are against time travel. So,
but they said they didn't pull those from the time stream. They cloned them.
Okay.
So, I mean, they must have gotten their DNA from the Cretaceous, but it sounds like they're just growing them in a vat. It's also, I mean, I think one of the points Brian K. Vaughan is trying to make is that like adults can be hypocritical about the things that they say that teenagers and young people shouldn't do.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a theme, right? Is that like when an adult tells you to do something just because they're an adult, you need to consider whether or not they're also being a hypocrite.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're traveling through time, fighting these other people who like traveling through time. At least you should never travel through time, they say, as they travel through time.
It's like the end credit sequence in Thor Ragnarok when Jeff Goldblum is like, you can't have a revolution without someone to fight. So it's like these teenagers would not be at war with the old folks if the old folks weren't going back in time to fight the war.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Now, we talked about that premonition of KJ and Mac kissing in the far future world. So KJ, in the prehistoric volume 3, she touches this floating pyramid thing that I don't know how it got there. Maybe it came through a folding.
Well, there's a version of that also in volume 1.
Right. Those are circular. Those are round, and they have kind of tentacles. But when she touches this pyramid, she sees things from the future. And one of them is Quanta Brownstein, the inventor of time travel, with blood on her face saying, "Run." And that happens within the volume. And the second thing is a vision of the grandfather standing by a crying Aaron and holding a gun and saying, "I'm so sorry." And, it brings up a lot of questions. And then the third one is the kiss. And just before that, Mac is saying, "Then I guess we do." So we do what? So yeah, those, we're still waiting to see what those are all about. On Heckinaldo's time machine, and also in the giant robots. We didn't talk about the giant robots that are battling in 2000, that are the two sides of the time travel issue. The giant robots belonging to the teenagers, as well as the Heckinaldo's time machine, seem to have some sort of organic material in them, this pink stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But we haven't really got an explanation of that, I don't think, unless it slipped by me.
No, I mean, I think that's Cliff just trying to design different kinds of tech for the different eras, right? So because the original time machine that we see the Heckinaldo using is also that kind of weird, fleshy, mechanical construct, whereas the stuff we see Japo using is very kind of, clunkier Megazord looking robotic stuff, and then like the stuff that Dr. Quanta looks like it came from the Apple Store. So I think they're just trying to show how the tech is evolving through time, or just to give it visual distinction between the times. I don't know that the fleshiness of the robots is a major plot point or major mystery, other than it's just kind of gross and ew. But
yeah, it looks like they got bubble gum coming out of them. But
yeah, it does. Yeah, it's very pink, fleshy.
Yeah, wow. So the clone Aaron, we still don't know for sure, as we talked about earlier, if she's trustworthy or not. In that volume, 1988 Aaron and 2016 Aaron go to this shopping mall that's closed, and I don't know how they got in. But there's a folding like above the fountain, and out of that they get KJ's field hockey stick with messages written on it, and one side of it says "Don't trust other Aaron," which at the time we wondered, does that mean 2016 Aaron or clone Aaron? And then when 1988 Aaron gets into prehistory, then she writes the message on the field hockey stick just so that it can appear on the other end for them to get. But we're still not quite sure. Well, do we know for sure that when she put that through the folding that it came out in 2016, or is that where that folding went? I don't know. I'm still a little uncertain of that whole sequence.
I think to me, that was like a very Bill and Ted. We're locked out of this building. We need to find the key. Oh, okay, well, let's go get the key, and then we'll travel back in time, and then we'll put the key over here under this bush. And hey, if we already did that, then the key should be there by now. And then they walk over, and there's a key, which like shouldn't really work logically. Like we should have to, unless they've already done, but time travel's weird. And so I don't know. I mean, I think this gets back to a little bit of their characterization as children, so their thinking can be a little simplistic at times. And I think Aaron is smart enough to know that at some point somebody has to carve this message into the field hockey stick that they are currently carrying and shove it through a folding so that it can be found on the other side. And when she sees a folding, maybe does she say something that she can see through it enough to see that it looks like the mall or something like that? But for whatever reason, she intuits and happens to be correct that she needs to complete the time loop for that hockey stick by sending it to this other Aaron from what is Aaron's future, but while Aaron is in the past.
Yeah, it made me think though that maybe when after she's been through that experience, she would know that she should write a clearer message on the stick, so she knew.
But we know there are no alternate timelines.
Which other Aaron?
But we know there are no other alternate timelines, and Aaron knows herself maybe well enough to know that by that point in the adventure, she trusted her older self, and so she remembered
she made the right decision.
Yeah, she knew that she would make the right decision, even given the ambiguity of the message, and she also knows what the message already said.
Yeah, I guess so.
And that's time travel. Like this is why I love time travel stories. Is there are times where you have to throw up your hands and say, well, it worked because it just worked. And it's funny because my wife and I have been arguing a fair bit about various time travel stories, and she and I seem to have pretty fundamental disagreements about how like the basics of how time travel works in stories and fiction. So it's led to like actual like, well, you just don't understand, and like storming off. I
love that. That's what you argue about with your wife.
Yeah. Well, we're special nerds. Special nerds.
Let's see. What else do we? Well, can you think of any other particular questions that we're still waiting for the answers to?
No, I think once you get the light bulb moment that grandfather is Japo, like that, I think crystallizes a lot of like, there's a much bigger, like they're not just meeting people randomly through the time stream. Like pretty much everyone they meet and have a significant interaction with seems fundamentally important to the story. There's no throwaway moments or throwaway beats, I don't think, in this story. And I've like I said, I've been mapping out the timeline so far, and so far everything works. The only part of it that doesn't work is when they meet older versions of themselves and the older version doesn't remember the events that are currently happening. So like that's the main thing. So I guess that would be my question. Yeah, that's the main thing that needs to get explained satisfactorily to me, to make sure that the diagram I've drawn has a coherent ending.
Well, and another thing, so, I mean, we spoiled everything else. So when they're in 2016, Mac and who's she with? Tiffany, they go to Mac's house, or at least where she lived in 1988. And the guy who lives there says something about the people who lived there moved out when their daughter died. I think it was leukemia. But, are we sure that he's a reliable source? Maybe he misunderstood what happened. Maybe she doesn't die of leukemia. It could turn out that her end is different from what she thinks it is.
Yeah, and that kind of stuff doesn't bother me so much. Like I said, I thought the interesting point of that was just how Mac reacts to it by thinking she's invincible. So if anything, that to me, knowing Brian K. Vaughan and knowing how closely he hews to the kill your darlings philosophy of storytelling, if anything, that means that, yeah, he's unreliable because Mac's going to die at some other point in this story.
Yeah, maybe she does die, but not leukemia.
Right, because she felt like she was invincible, she does something stupid, or maybe does something that she perceives as selfless, and in that selflessness, she actually does get herself killed because, who knows,
Yeah. I was surprised that at the end of the fourth volume, the Tiffany from 2000 travels with them, doesn't she? To the far future?
Yep, she's in the robot.
So yeah, that I wasn't expecting a future version of them to go with them. I wonder that creates some interesting issues.
It actually doesn't, as long as the Tiffany we're watching right now gets put back in the time stream so that she eventually grows up to be the woman who then goes in the robot with them. So as long as you close younger Tiffany's loop, like this is all about loops, right? So the first loop we're introduced to is when Erin gets shot and then she gets taken into the future to be healed, and then she gets brought back, but she doesn't get brought back to the same moment. So there's a brief period of time where there are two Erins operating along the timeline simultaneously. But then there's an Erin that's in the ship unconscious, having come from the future, and then there's the Erin who hasn't yet been shot. And then once that Erin gets shot and goes into the future, then the Erin who's currently inside the space-time ship wakes up, exits, and continues moving forward in the timeline. So it's a closed loop.
Yeah.
And so as long as you close the loop, even if you close it and there are like years that have to occur before the next event where the two people meet each other, it should work.
Yeah.
Now, remains to be seen. We don't know. Like, something may happen to Tiffany and adult Tiffany in this future world that changes that. But my supposition is, as long as young Tiffany eventually makes it back to 1988 to grow up to be this person by year 2000, we should be good.
Yeah. I was just a little surprised that she would leave her husband behind, who apparently is not dead. But yeah, of course she's disappointed in her life otherwise, but I think she was happy with her husband. So I don't know, it's kind of a interesting choice story-wise.
Yeah, I think a lot of, I think the theme we keep coming back to is like, by the time you're an adult, are you happy with how things have gone, and how do you want to move forward into the future? Like a lot of this book is about growing up, and a lot of Brian K. Vaughan stories are about growing up. Like Why the Last Man is you can easily say that it's about the last surviving male human, but really it's about how the last surviving boy becomes the last surviving man. Like, it's a story of growth and development from boyhood to manhood. So those seem to be themes that Brian K. Vaughan likes coming back to. Brian K. Vaughan also wrote for Lost, we should point out, which I think is relevant when considering a mystery story like Paper Girls.
Yeah, I never saw it, but I heard a lot about it, and I know people got really frustrated with it by the end. And it seemed like some people were getting kind of frustrated by this too, but I don't think it ever really becomes a mess. You don't know what's going on necessarily, but like you said, it's well crafted, and everything so far seems to be kind of falling into place. It's just, it kind of reveals its information slowly.
I mean, having just reread through all of this so you and I could talk about it, I'm kind of amazed this isn't a bigger book. Maybe it is just because it's confusing and people are waiting for it to finish, and then they'll go back and read it all as a single piece. But I think this is excellently done, and so I'm a little perplexed why it's not more popular.
I mean, it seems to have been overshadowed by Saga as far as Vaughan's work is concerned.
Which I guess I get. I mean, Saga is a big sprawling epic, and it provides lots of opportunities for interesting cosplay, which is, big in the community right now. But
maybe it's a little easier for the, I don't know, the people who don't care about time travel to follow. Maybe this is a little bit more of a for a more specific audience. I don't know.
Maybe I think this is harder sci-fi. I think there are tighter rules. Mm-hmm. In this story than in Saga. I think Saga has a much looser structure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But they're both, I like them both, so I'm not complaining. I'm glad. You think back that Why the Last Man started coming out in the early 2000s, and Pride of Baghdad was 2005, 2006. This is he's had a good run of telling consistently engaging and interesting stories, and he has a history of getting to work with really top-notch artist talent. So yeah, I'm excited for this to wrap up, and I imagine I will be satisfied by the ending of it, and I'm excited for whatever story Brian K. Vaughan wants to tell next.
Yeah, I mean, he can keep going with this as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I don't really want it to end right away because I'm enjoying it too much, but yeah, I'm sure whenever it ends, it'll be, as you said, maybe kind of melancholy based on what we know, but satisfying.
Yeah. I feel like I have a handle of what's going on in this book.
Yeah, so do I. I'm not overly confused. Just waiting on those questions we talked about. But
I thought I would be more confused going into it than I came out of it. But I'm glad it actually holds together pretty well.
So Ryan is on Science Sort of podcast, and tell us about that.
Yeah, that's a podcast I do where me and my other science nerd people, I am a scientist. I guess I've been on the show before, so I didn't really introduce myself. But hi, scientist. Hello. Nice to meet you. And we do a show where we drink beer and talk about science, and it's a lot of fun. And I actually do study paleontology, so seeing people go into the Pleistocene and interact with ground sloths. I actually study ground sloths specifically, one of my research projects anyway. So if you want to learn about that and all kinds of other science, we don't just talk about paleo, we talk about all science under the sun. You can go check that out at sciencesword.com. Follow me on Twitter at Haupt, and my personal website, or if you want to see more of my actual research, is ryanhaupt.com.
Paper Girls is published by Image. Issue 21 just came out last Wednesday. Tell us what you think. Write us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com or contact us through social media. Find all the links on the right sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com. We're also on the Comics Podcast Network at comicspodcasts.com and on comiccon.com, where our new episodes go up on Fridays, give or take a day. Also, please give us a review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, iHeartRadio, or wherever you find podcasts. Tell the world why you enjoy Deconstructing Comics. Our theme is from bensound.com. Once again, don't forget to help support the show with a pledge at patreon.com/deconcomics. Last Thursday on To the Bat Poles, we discussed the first appearance of Milton Berle as Louis the Lilac. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us, and Mulele and I will critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. A new episode is coming next Monday, right here in this podcast feed. Then in 2 weeks, Kumar and I discuss the first 4 volumes of G. Willow Wilson's Ms. Marvel. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.